Anderson Cooper of CNN is on assignment tonight for 60 Minutes.
You may not remember the name Joe Darby, but you remember the impact of what he did. Darby turned in the pictures of prisoner abuse at Abu Ghraib in Iraq, pictures he'd discovered purely by accident. Unfortunately for Darby, exposing the truth has changed his life forever and for the worse. We first broadcast this story last December, the story of an ordinary Joe who grew up in Appalachia and signed up to be an MP in the Army Reserves. His local unit was sent to Abu Ghraib, where Darby worked in the office while others guarded the prisoners. And then one day, when Joe Darby wanted scenic pictures to send home, he spotted the unit's camera buff prison guard, Charles Grainer.
So I walked up to Grainer and hey, do you have any pictures? And he said, yeah, hold on. Reaches into his computer bag and pulls out 2 CDs and just hands them to me.
And he gives you these discs. Do you think he realized what was on them? I mean, do you think he knew he was
I don't think he realized what was on, but I don't think it would have mattered either way. I knew Grainer, and Grainer trusted me.
That trust was about to change Darby's life forever. He copied Grainer's discs and gave him back the originals. When Darby looked at the photos, he first saw shots of life in Iraq, but then came upon the pictures that launched the scandal, starting with this pyramid of naked Iraqis.
I didn't realize it was Iraqis at first, because we lived in prison cells too.
And you thought this was maybe Americans? You thought that
I had no idea.
Soldiers
I had
goofing
no
off.
idea. I laughed. I looked at it and I laughed. And then the next photo was of Grainer and England standing behind them. And I was like, wait a minute, this is the prison. These are prisoners. Then it kind of sunk in that they were doing this to prisoners. This was people being forced to do this.
Forced, Darby says, by Grainer, who he calls the ringleader.
What was Charles Grainer like?
If you were around him long enough, you saw that he had just a dark side, a morbid side.
And a sadistic side, according to Darby, who told us Grainer directed the abusive posing and picture-taking during his night shift, when he and his buddies were alone with the prisoners.
And what's going through your mind, clicking through these
Disbelief.
pictures?
I tried to think of a reason why they would do this.
Well, there's someone who say, look, this is a valuable interrogation tool.
These were MPs. Our job wasn't to interrogate prisoners.
There has been testimony that some of the MPs were told to soften the prisoners up, and that this was part of that.
Yeah, and I've heard that, and I wasn't there. I didn't work the tier. I can't say that that didn't happen.
But no matter why they were doing it, Darby knew what they were doing was wrong.
I've always had a moral sense of right and wrong, and I knew that, friends or not, it had to stop.
Your unit was pretty close-knit.
Mm-hmm.
You guys had trained together, lived together.
We joined together.
Similar backgrounds?
It was all small town.
Still, Darby decided he had to turn in the pictures, but he didn't want his friends to know that he'd done it.
It was important to you to remain anonymous. Why?
I knew a lot of them wouldn't understand and would view it as me being a stool pigeon or a rat, however you want to put it.
You knew there would be some kind of investigation.
Oh, I knew these people were going to prison.
You did?
I knew that.
And in your opinion, deserved to go to prison?
Yes.
Darby copied Grainer's pictures onto a disc and put it in an envelope with an anonymous letter. He took the envelope to the Criminal Investigations Division, CID, and told them it had been left on his desk.
This was left in my office. I was told to give it to the CID. And I said, have a nice day, sir, and turned around and walked away.
And you thought maybe that'd be the end of it?
I hoped it would. I really did.
How long was it before they came back?
Not even 45 minutes.
Really?
He knew where I worked.
And the investigator knew that Darby wasn't telling the truth. He promised to keep Darby's name secret and convinced him to explain how he'd really gotten the pictures. Then investigators immediately began to round up the suspects.
Once they were brought in, once this investigation began, were they removed from the base?
No. They still had their weapons. They still had unlimited access to the facility and me the whole time, for almost a month.
So you were scared?
Very. Slept with a pistol under my pillow, loaded.
You slept with a pistol under your pillow?
Mm-hmm, with my hand on it. I put it in my pillowcase, I'd put my hand on it, and cocked the hammer, and I'd sleep with it under my pillow.
Every night?
Every night. I slept in a room by myself, and anybody could come in the middle of the night. You walk in the door, you hang a left, and you come in and cut my throat.
And you really thought that could happen? Someone could cut your throat?
I knew that if they found out who did it, they would be after him.
When was it that they were finally removed?
Probably about 3 weeks, three and a half weeks.
Darby could finally sleep without a gun under his pillow. The suspects were gone. His name was still secret. Several months later, 60 Minutes 2 broke the story of the pictures. An article in The New Yorker revealed Darby's role, though no one in Iraq seemed to notice. But then, Darby was having lunch in the mess hall watching Donald Rumsfeld testify before Congress about Abu Ghraib when Rumsfeld said,
"There are many who did their duty professionally, and we should mention that as well. First Specialist Joseph Darby, who alerted the appropriate authorities that abuses were occurring."
I just stopped in mid-bite. I was like eating and I just stopped, and what the hell just happened? Now the anxiety came back. Now I'm worried.
Yeah, I mean, so much for anonymity.
Yeah. Everybody in the unit knew within 4 hours.
And the reaction was?
It wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. You know, I got support.
But not back home in Cumberland, Maryland, a military town that felt Darby had betrayed his fellow soldiers. The commander of the local VFW post, Colin Engelbach, told us what people were calling Darby.
He was a rat, he was a traitor, he let his unit down, he let his fellow soldiers down, U.S. military. Basically, he was no good.
And you agree with that?
I agree that his actions that he did were no good, and borderline traitor, yes.
What he says in his defense is, look, I'm an MP, and this is something which was illegal.
Right. But do you put the enemy above your buddies? I wouldn't.
Their hometown held a vigil for members of his unit, including the accused. Not, however, for Darby.
These were people who knew me since I was born. These were people who were my parents' friends, my grandparents' friends, that turned against me.
To prevent any soldiers from retaliating against him in Iraq, the military sent Darby back to the States early, ahead of the rest of his unit.
I got called in my commander's office at like 10 o'clock at night. He said, you have your bags packed? I said, sir, we live in a tent. I always have my bags packed. He said, good. Be on the flight line in an hour, you leave.
When Darby arrived at Dover Air Force Base, his wife Bernadette was there to meet him. He thought they would head back home, but the Army had other plans.
When an officer says to you, what do you want to do?
I said, sir, I just want to go home. I've always just wanted to go home. He said, well, son, that's not an option. He said, the Army Reserve has done a security assessment of the area, and it's not safe for you there. You can't go home.
You can't go home?
You can probably never go home.
They actually said you can probably never go home?
Yes. They said if you had to choose, where would you want to live? And, you know, basically, where do you pick? You know, if you lived a whole life in one area.
Did it seem fair to you?
No.
It's not fair that we're being punished for him doing the right thing.
The Army's security assessment of his hometown had concluded that the overall threat of harassment or criminal activity to the Darbys is imminent. A person could fire into his residence from the roadway. The local VFW commander told us the military was right to keep Darby out of town.
Probably so. There was a lot of threats, a lot of phone calls to his wife.
There was a lot of anger in Cumberland.
Yes, there was. Because it really did put our troops in harm's way, more so than they already were.
What did you hear people call your husband?
That he was a dead man, that he was walking around with a bullseye on his head.
Walking around with a bullseye on his head?
Yep. I heard them say that.
To keep Joe and Bernadette safe, the military moved them to an Army base with bodyguards around the clock.
I couldn't go anywhere without security, nowhere.
Even going to a restaurant, that could be scary for you.
When you walk in with me and her and 6 guys,
Yeah.
and all of them are armed.
How long did that last? How long did you have security guards?
Probably almost 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
But while he was a villain to his neighbors, he was a hero to people he'd never met, including Caroline and Senator Ted Kennedy, who gave him a Profile and Courage Award in honor of President John Kennedy.
It was Joseph Darby who spoke out when others looked the other way.
Joe left the Army recently, and he misses it. They miss their hometown as well. They say they'll never move back to Cumberland. Instead, they've moved on, but they are still wary.
We've started over.
But you don't want to say what you do?
No.
But you don't want to say where you live?
No.
You don't want to say anything about your family?
No.
Why?
I worry about the one guy who wants to get even with me. Mm-hmm. And that one guy could hurt me and my family.
This has made you paranoid.
To a degree.
Yeah.
Is it true you've had relatives turn against you?
Oh, yes. Yes.
I have to.
Both sides of the family. Hers and mine.
6 of the 7 guards involved in the abuse went to prison. Joe testified against Charles Grainer.
He just gave me this stone-cold, evil stare the entire time I was on the stand. Didn't take his eyes off me once.
What was the look?
You put me here, and someday I'll repay you for it.
Darby had been under a gag order until the trials ended. He gave his first interview to GQ and told us he wants to restore his unit's honor.
I want people to understand that I went to Iraq with 200 of the finest servicemen I've ever seen in my life. But those 200, for the rest of their lives, their unit is going to carry a bad name because of what 7 individuals did.
General George Fay, who investigated Abu Ghraib, told us that Grainer and his gang took the vast majority of the pictures for their own sadistic amusement, but that in a few cases, military intelligence officers had asked the gang to soften up a prisoner. The general called Darby courageous for blowing the whistle.
Did you want the pictures to be leaked to the media?
No, not at all. I never thought it would be anything that the media would get a hold of, and even if they did, I didn't think it would be as big as it was.
Do you wish that it wasn't you who was given those CDs?
No, because if they'd been given to somebody else, it might not have been reported.
And would that have been so bad if it had never been reported?
Ignorance is bliss, they say, but to actually know what they were doing, you can't stand by and let that happen.
There's still a lot of people that will say, well, look, you know, so what? They did this. You know, Saddam did things which were much worse.
We're Americans. We're not Saddam. You know, we hold ourselves to a higher standard. Our soldiers hold themselves to a higher standard.
You'd still do it again?
Yes. They broke the law and they had to be punished.
And it's that simple?
It's that simple.